A missed appointment. A single photograph. That's all it took to shatter a picture-perfect life. For Olivia, it was the day of her baby's first ultrasound, a day her billionaire husband, Richard, swore he wouldn't miss. But while she was alone in that cold, sterile room, he was somewhere else entirely. He was on a sun-drenched beach, his arm wrapped not around his pregnant wife, but around a woman the world would soon know. He thought his secrets were safe, buried under piles of money. He had no idea he was married to a woman who was about to make him headline news. The silence in the ultrasound room was a living thing. It was a cold, clinical hum that seemed to amplify the frantic thumping of Olivia's own heart. She stared at the large monitor, a blank grey screen that held the promise of her future, a future she was supposed to be sharing. Her hand, trembling slightly, rested on the curve of her stomach. 4 months. 4 months of morning sickness, of strange cravings, and of a burgeoning love so fierce it almost frightened her. "He's just running a little late, I'm sure," Dr. Evans said, her voice a practiced, soothing melody that did nothing to calm the storm in Olivia's chest. "Richard is a busy man." Olivia forced a smile, a brittle thing that felt like it might crack her face. "Yes, always busy." She had repeated that phrase so many times, it had become a mantra, an excuse, a shield. Richard Sterling, the real estate mogul, the darling of Wall Street, the man whose face was plastered on the cover of Forbes, was always busy. His time was measured in millions of dollars, in deals that shaped the city's skyline. She knew that. She had accepted that. But today was supposed to be different. He had promised. "Live my love," he'd said just last night, his voice a low, intoxicating rumble as he traced the line of her jaw. "Nothing in this world would make me miss seeing our baby for the first time. I'll move mountains. I'll reschedule the mare. That's our moment." His words, like everything else about him, had been perfect. Richard was a master architect, not just of buildings, but of moments. Their life together was a carefully constructed masterpiece of glamour and romance. Spontaneous trips to Paris on his private jet, front row seats at New York Fashion Week, whispered sweet nothings over candle-lit dinners at restaurants, so exclusive they didn't have names. He had swept into her life a whirlwind of charm and power, and she, a quiet, unassuming librarian, had been caught up in the storm, dizzy with a happiness she'd never imagined possible. But lately the perfection had started to feel fragile. There were the hushed phone calls he would take in the other room, the sudden business trips that seemed to pop up with alarming frequency. When she'd asked, he'd smiled, that disarming smile of his, the one that made her feel silly and paranoid. "Just putting out fires, my love. The price of success." And she had believed him. She wanted to believe him. An hour passed. The grey screen remained blank. Dr. Evans, her professional patience wearing thin, suggested they reschedule. Olivia felt a hot flush of shame. The other women in the waiting room with their proud, beaming partners had glanced at her with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The pregnant wife of the billionaire, all alone. "No, let's just do it," Olivia said, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't bear the thought of coming back, of reliving this humiliation. She needed to see her baby. She needed to know that one thing at least was real. The cold gel on her stomach was a shock. She flinched as Dr. Evans moved the transducer. And then it happened. A flicker on the screen. A tiny pulsating shape. A sound filled the room, a rhythmic, powerful whooshing that was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. "There's the heartbeat," Dr. Evans said, her voice softening with genuine warmth. "Strong and steady. Congratulations, Olivia. You have a very healthy baby." Tears streamed down Olivia's face, hot and silent. It was a girl, her daughter. In that moment, the ache of Richard's absence was a sharp physical pain, a gaping wound in what should have been a perfect memory. She took the grainy black and white photos, her fingers caressing the image of the tiny life inside her. She sent him a text. "We saw her today. She's perfect." The reply came hours later, a terse, impersonal message. "Knew she would be. So sorry, Liv. Got dragged into an emergency meeting with investors from Dubai. Still locked in. We'll make it up to you, I promise." The disappointment was a bitter pill. She tried to swallow it to be the understanding wife she had always been. She drew a bath in their palatial penthouse apartment, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. She tried to focus on the joy on the little girl who was now her entire world, but the unease lingered a shadow she couldn't shake. It was that night as she mindlessly scrolled through her phone, a habit she'd picked up to fill the long, lonely evenings that the shadow took form. It started as a knot in her stomach, a prickle of dread. Her friend Maya had sent her a link to a popular Instagram gossip account, one that chronicled the lives of the rich and shameless. The caption was innocuous: "Another day in paradise." But the picture stole the air from her lungs. It was a selfie, a sun-drenched, carefree selfie taken on a pristine white sand beach. In the foreground, a woman with a mane of platinum blonde hair and a predatory smile pouted at the camera. Her name was Chloe Vanderbilt, a socialite and so-called influencer whose manufactured life was a constant source of tabloid fodder. But it wasn't Chloe's face that made Olivia's world tilt on its axis. It was the man beside her. He was shirtless, his skin bronzed, a pair of expensive sunglasses perched on his head. His arm was wrapped possessively around Chloe's waist, his hand splayed possessively on her hip. He was smiling a wide, genuine, unguarded smile that Olivia hadn't seen in months. It was Richard. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. The emergency meeting with Dubai investors. The city skyline behind him wasn't Dubai. It wasn't even New York. It was the unmistakable turquoise water and lush green hills of St. Bart's. The lie was so audacious, so brazen it was almost comical. He hadn't just missed the most important day of her life. He had been with another woman. He had posted the evidence for the world to see, a digital middle finger to her and their unborn child. The heartbreak was a tidal wave, a crushing force that left her gasping for breath. But as the initial shock subsided, something else began to bubble up from the depths of her despair. It was a cold, hard fury, an emotion so intense it burned away the tears. He had underestimated her. He had seen her as a quiet, compliant accessory to his perfect life. He had never bothered to look deeper, to see the steel beneath the silk. He thought he could break her heart and walk away unscathed. That night, lying alone in their king-sized bed, the city lights mocking her with their cold, indifferent beauty, Olivia made a promise to herself and to the tiny, sleeping life inside her. Richard Sterling wanted to be famous. He loved the spotlight. Well, she was about to give him the performance of a lifetime. He didn't know it yet, but he had just become the star of a new story, and she would be the one writing the headlines. The first 24 hours were a blur of managed hysteria. Olivia moved through the opulent emptiness of the penthouse, like a ghost, her every action mechanical. She made coffee she didn't drink. She stared out at the panoramic view of Central Park without seeing it. The picture on her phone was a brand on her mind, seared into her memory with the heat of betrayal. Richard, Chloe, St. Bart's, her husband, the man who had vowed to cherish her, was a liar, and not just a simple liar, but one of breathtaking arrogance. The sheer audacity of it was what kept replaying in her mind. He hadn't even bothered to be discreet. It was a public declaration of his infidelity, a smug display of his power. He believed he was untouchable, that his wealth and status were a shield that made him invulnerable to consequences. His texts started coming in a steady stream, a pathetic attempt at damage control. Liv just landed back in NY. Meeting was a killer. I'm exhausted. Heading straight to the office. So much to catch up on. Can't wait to see you tonight. I've missed you. Each message was a fresh twist of the knife. She didn't reply. Her silence was a new and unfamiliar weapon, and she wielded it with a chilling precision. Let him wonder. Let him sweat. For the first time in their relationship, she had the upper hand, and she had no intention of relinquishing it. That afternoon, the doorbell chimed a sharp, intrusive sound that shattered the funereal silence. It was Maya, her best friend, since their college days, a fiery, no-nonsense lawyer with a bullshit detector that was second to none. She took one look at Olivia's pale, tear-streaked face and enveloped her in a hug that was fierce and protective. I saw it. Maya said, her voice laced with a venom that was strangely comforting. That scumbag. That narcissistic, fame-hungry pig. I swear, Olivia, I will personally key his precious Bugatti. Olivia let out a choked laugh that was half a sob. Don't bother. It's probably a lease. Maya pulled back her sharp, intelligent eyes, scanning Olivia's face. What are you going to do? I don't know, Olivia whispered the confession, a painful admission of her own helplessness. He owns everything. This apartment, the cars, the bank accounts. I'm a librarian, Maya. I have a savings account with $3,000 in it. You have more than that, Maya said, her voice firm. You have a prenuptial agreement. I read every single word of that document before I let you sign it. It's ironclad. He might be a bastard, but his lawyers are meticulous. There's an infidelity clause. A big one. The prenup. Olivia had almost forgotten about it. At the time, it had seemed like a cold, cynical document, a jarring intrusion into their fairy tale romance. Richard had dismissed it as a mere formality, a piece of paper for the bean counters. Now it was her only life raft in a sea of uncertainty. But I'll have to prove it. Olivia said, the practicalities of the situation crashing down on her. He'll deny it. He'll say the picture is old, that it's photoshopped. He'll hire the best lawyers in the city to paint me as a hysterical gold-digging wife. Let him try, Maya said, a predatory glint in her eye. Public opinion is a powerful thing, Liv. And right now, public opinion is not on his side. She pulled out her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. She brought up the gossip site, the comments section, a raging dumpster fire of public outrage, while his pregnant wife is at home. What a pig, Chloe Vanderbilt is a notorious home wrecker. No surprise there. I hope his wife takes him to the cleaners. The comments were a balm to her wounded soul. She wasn't alone. The world saw him for what he was. But it wasn't enough. A few nasty comments on a gossip blog wouldn't bring down a man like Richard Sterling. He would weather the storm, release a carefully crafted PR statement, and in a few weeks the world would move on to the next scandal. I need more than just a picture, Maya. Olivia said, her voice growing stronger, a new and unfamiliar resolve taking root in the ashes of her heartbreak. I need something he can't deny, something that will ruin him. Maya looked at her, a slow, admiring smile spreading across her face. There's the Olivia I know, the one who aced her thesis on investigative journalism. You've been playing the part of the dutiful wife for so long, I think you forgot who you really are. It was true. She had submerged her own identity in her own ambitions and passions, taking a back seat to his all-consuming career. She had become an extension of him, a beautifully dressed accessory on his arm, and in doing so she had given him all the power. No more. His entire life is a lie. Maya. Olivia said, her mind racing the pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even realized she was solving starting to click into place. The charity work for his foundation, the ethical sourcing of his building materials, the carefully cultivated image of a self-made man. It's all a facade. I've seen things. I've overheard conversations. I never put it all together. She thought of the late-night meetings with men in expensive suits who looked more like gangsters than businessmen. The hushed, cryptic phone calls about zoning variances and political donations. The second set of accounting books she'd accidentally stumbled upon in his home office, which he'd quickly explained away as creative tax strategies. At the time, she had chosen to believe him to turn a blind eye to the darkness that lurked beneath the glittering surface of their life. Now she saw it all with a terrifying clarity. He's not just a cheater, Maya. Olivia said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. He's a crook, and I'm going to expose him for what he really is. The decision once made was like a shot of adrenaline. The grief was still there, a dull, throbbing ache in her chest. But it was now overlaid with a new and exhilarating sense of purpose. She was no longer a victim. She was a woman on a mission. That evening, when Richard finally came home, he found her sitting in the living room, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. She looked calm, composed, almost serene. He, on the other hand, was a mess. His tie was loosened, his hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Liv. He began, his voice thick with a carefully rehearsed contrition. I am so sorry. I know I messed up. The meeting. It was a nightmare. I should have been there. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. She looked at him, her gaze cool and steady. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply held up her phone, the picture of him and Chloe displayed on the screen. The color drained from his face. He stared at the image, his jaw working for a long, silent moment. The mask of the charming, devoted husband slipped, and for the first time, she saw the real Richard Sterling. He was cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless. You should have been more careful, she said, her voice as calm and quiet as the eye of a hurricane. Social media is a tricky thing. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Don't be naive, Olivia. You think a silly picture is going to hurt me. I'll have my PR team issue a statement. We'll say it was a business trip, that Chloe is a client. It will all blow over. I'm sure it will, she said, standing up, the movement fluid and graceful. She walked to the window, her back to him, and looked out at the city that he believed he owned. But this isn't about the picture, Richard. This is about everything else. He frowned, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. What are you talking about? She turned to face him, a small, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. You really should be more careful about the things you leave lying around your office. Zoning variances, political donations, creative tax strategies. It's all so fascinating. The blood drained from his face. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. And in her eyes, he didn't see the quiet, adoring wife he had married. He saw a stranger, a formidable, intelligent, and very, very angry stranger. What have you done? He whispered, his voice hoarse, with a dawning, horrified realization. Nothing yet, she said, her smile widening. But the night is young, and I have a feeling tomorrow's headlines are going to be very, very interesting. The penthouse, once a symbol of her gilded cage, transformed into Olivia's strategic command center. The initial dizzying rush of defiance had settled into a cold, calculated resolve. She was no longer just a scorned wife. She was an intelligence operative deep in enemy territory. Every creak of the floorboards, every chime of the elevator sent a jolt of adrenaline through her veins. Richard was home less and less consumed with what he called damage control for the St. Bart's photo, a firestorm that his PR team was struggling to extinguish. This gave Olivia the time she needed. With Maya acting as her handler on the outside, they began to map out their strategy. He's arrogant, Maya had said during one of their encrypted calls, and arrogant men get sloppy. He won't believe you have the guts or the intelligence to actually do anything. Use that. Olivia did. She played the part of the wounded, withdrawn wife to perfection. She was quiet, tearful, and seemingly broken. When Richard was home, she would flinch from his touch, her silence a constant passive-aggressive rebuke that fed his ego. He saw her as defeated, which was precisely what she wanted. Her first target was his home office. It was his sanctuary, a sleek, minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a desk carved from a single piece of obsidian. It was where he held his most secret meetings and took his most cryptic calls. She had a key, of course, but he'd recently installed a new state-of-the-art security system with a keypad. For days, she watched him, her mind a sponge absorbing every detail. She noticed he would often tap his fingers on the table when he was thinking a nervous, rhythmic pattern. One evening, as he was distracted by a furious phone call with his publicist, she watched from the doorway as he absently tapped out the code on the desk before entering it into the keypad. It was a sequence of 8 digits, the date of his first major real estate acquisition. It was so perfectly, narcissistically him. The next day, as soon as he left for the office, she was inside. The room smelled of him. Expensive cologne and an undercurrent of metallic tension. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she began her search. She wasn't looking for paper. Richard was too smart for that. Everything was digital, protected by layers of encryption. Her librarian skills, once a source of gentle mockery for Richard's high-flying friends, were now her sharpest weapon. She knew how to find information, how to see patterns in chaos. She remembered stumbling upon a strange-looking external hard drive a few months ago, tucked away in a drawer of his antique Globe bar. He had snatched it from her, his reaction unusually sharp, saying it was a backup of old family photos. It was the only time he had ever seemed genuinely rattled by her presence in his office. It was still there, nestled between a bottle of 25-year-old Macallan and a set of crystal tumblers. It was a sleek silver rectangle, no bigger than a deck of cards. Plugging it into his desktop, she was met with a password prompt. She tried the usuals: his birthday, her birthday, their anniversary, the name of his first company. Nothing. Frustration gnawed at her. She sat in his leather chair, the silence of the apartment pressing in on her. What was the one thing he loved more than his money, more than his own reflection, his legacy, the narrative he had so carefully constructed? She thought back to their first date, how he had spoken with such passion about the Sterling Tower, the gleaming skyscraper that was his crowning achievement. He had called it his true north. She typed the words into the password field, True North 212. The drive unlocked. It was a labyrinth of folders and subfolders, a digital maze of shell corporations, offshore accounts and encrypted ledgers. It was the second set of books she had glimpsed, but on a scale she could never have imagined. This wasn't just creative tax strategy. This was a massive, sophisticated web of fraud, bribery, and money laundering. Millions of dollars siphoned from company accounts, moved through a series of untraceable transactions, and funneled into the pockets of city officials, zoning board members, and union bosses. She found a folder labeled Project Nightingale. Inside was a detailed accounting of payments made to a shell corporation, which in turn had made a series of political donations to Councilman Robert Jennings, a man who had been instrumental in pushing through the zoning changes for Richard's latest luxury development. It was a clear, undeniable case of bribery. Her hands trembled as she copied the files onto a new encrypted thumb drive she had purchased with cash. This was it. This was more than just a messy divorce. This was a federal crime. But as she was about to eject the drive, a different folder caught her eye. It was labeled Chloe. Her breath hitched. Against her better judgment, she clicked it open. It wasn't love letters or romantic photos. It was a series of wire transfers, monthly payments of $50,000 sent to Chloe Vanderbilt for the past 2 years. The memo on each transfer was the same consulting fee. And then she saw the contract, a non-disclosure agreement signed by Chloe that essentially paid her to be Richard's public girlfriend. The contract stipulated a certain number of public appearances, a steady stream of social media posts, and absolute discretion about the true nature of their arrangement. It was a business transaction. Even his affair was a carefully managed illusion. The realization didn't lessen the pain, but it sharpened her anger into a diamond-hard point. He hadn't just betrayed her. He had cheapened the very idea of love and affection, reducing it to another line item on his balance sheet. As she was absorbing this new, sickening revelation, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. The chime of the private elevator. He was back. Her mind raced. She couldn't be found here. Not now. She hastily ejected the thumb drive, shoved it into her pocket, and tried to close the folders, but her fumbling fingers betrayed her. The Chloe folder was still open on the screen. She shut down the computer, praying it would be fast enough. The sound of his key in the front door was a death knell. She slipped out of the office, closing the door silently behind her, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was halfway down the hall when he walked in, his face a thunderous mask. "What were you doing?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. I was looking for a book," she stammered, her mind seizing on the first plausible lie. "I thought I left one in there." His eyes, cold and assessing, swept over her, then flickered towards the office door. He walked past her into the room she had just vacated. She stood frozen in the hallway, every muscle tensed. She heard the soft whir of the computer booting up, a silence that stretched for an eternity. When he emerged, his face was unreadable. He looked at her, a long, searching gaze that seemed to peel back the layers of her deception. She braced herself for the explosion, for the accusations, for the end of the charade. But instead he smiled. It was a slow, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Find your book," he asked, his voice smooth as silk. "No," she whispered. It wasn't there. "Too bad," he said, walking towards her. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch unexpectedly gentle. "You look tired, Liv. Why don't you go lie down? I'll have dinner sent up." It was a dismissal, a threat wrapped in a velvet glove. He knew, or he suspected, and he was letting her know that he was watching. The game had changed. He was no longer underestimating her. He was hunting her. As she walked to their bedroom on unsteady legs, the encrypted thumb drive in her pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She had the ammunition she needed to destroy him. But now it was a race against time. She had to get it to someone who could use it before he found a way to silence her for good. The air in the penthouse had become thin and sharp, each breath a calculated risk. Richard's feigned gentleness was far more terrifying than any overt rage. He moved around the apartment with a predatory grace, his eyes constantly following her. He would ask casual questions about her day, about her phone calls, about her conversations with Maya. It was a subtle psychological water torture designed to make her break. She knew her digital footprint was being monitored, her phone likely bugged. The game had escalated, and she was running out of moves. "You can't do this alone anymore," Maya insisted, during a hushed meeting in a noisy coffee shop, a place so public and mundane she hoped it was safe. "You need to get that drive to a professional, someone he can't buy or intimidate." There was only one name that came to mind: Thea Gallo. Gallo was a legend, an old-school investigative journalist with a Pulitzer Prize and a reputation for being a bulldog. She had taken down corrupt senators, exposed corporate malfeasance at the highest levels, and was famously immune to the charms and threats of powerful men. Her column in the New York Chronicle was a weekly dose of righteous fury that struck fear into the hearts of the city's elite. Richard hated her. He had once called her a bitter, sanctimonious harpy after she'd written a scathing piece about the tax breaks given to his company. Contacting her was the next challenge. Olivia couldn't use her own phone or email. She went to a public library, a place that felt like a return to a former, safer self, and used a computer to create an anonymous email address. Her message was brief and cryptic. Subject Project Nightingale. I have information about Richard Sterling, information he would kill to keep quiet. If you want the biggest story of your career, meet me. Friday, 4 p.m. The Folly. The Folly was a forgotten, graffiti-covered ruin in Central Park, a decorative structure from the 19th century that was now little more than a curiosity for tourists. It was open public, yet offered enough secluded corners to have a conversation without being easily seen. She signed the email Cassandra, the Trojan princess cursed to speak the truth but never be believed. It felt fitting. The 2 days leading up to the meeting were the longest of her life. She felt Richard's suspicion like a physical weight, his presence a constant suffocating pressure. He suggested they go away for the weekend to their house in the Hamptons. Just the two of us, he'd said, his voice laced with a meaning that made her skin crawl. We need to reconnect. She made an excuse, a checkup with Dr. Evans she couldn't possibly miss. The lie felt flimsy, and she saw a flicker of cold anger in his eyes, before he masked it with a sigh of disappointment. On Friday, She dressed in the most anonymous clothes she owned: jeans, a nondescript grey hoodie, and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. She took a meandering route to the park, switching subway trains 3 times, paying with cash. She felt like a character in a spy novel, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Thea Gallo was already there. She was smaller than Olivia had imagined, with a shock of unruly salt and pepper hair, and eyes that were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. She was leaning against a stone archway, pretending to read a book. But Olivia could see her gaze sweeping the area, cataloguing every person who walked by. Cassandra Thea asked, her voice a low, gravelly rasp, not even looking up from her book as Olivia approached. "Yes. You've got 5 minutes to convince me this isn't a waste of my time." Olivia's hands trembled as she pulled the thumb drive from her pocket. "It's all on here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Everything. The shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the ledgers for Project Nightingale. He has Councilman Jennings in his pocket. It's all documented." Thea finally looked at her, her gaze sharp and appraising. She didn't take the drive. A lot of people make accusations against Richard Sterling. He's a rich, powerful man. It comes with the territory. Why should I believe you because I'm his wife? The words hung in the air between them. Thea's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She studied Olivia's face, seeing past the hoodie and the fear to the desperate resolve beneath. Why Thea asked the single word encompassing a universe of questions. Why now? Why turn on him? What's in it for you? Olivia's hand went to her stomach, a gesture that was both protective and defiant. He missed our baby's first ultrasound to be with his mistress in St. Bart's, she said, her voice cracking with a raw, undeniable pain. He thinks I'm just a quiet, stupid accessory he can discard when he's bored. He's about to find out how wrong he is. It was the detail that sealed it. Not the financial data, but the human story. The betrayal. Thea Gallo knew that the best stories weren't about numbers. They were about hubris, and Richard Sterling's hubris was about to be his downfall. She held out her hand. "Give it to me." Olivia placed the drive in her palm. The transfer of power was immediate. The weight on her shoulders lifted, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating sense of inevitability. She had lit the fuse. Now all she could do was wait for the explosion. "Go home," Thea said, her voice softening slightly. "Act normal. Say nothing. Don't contact me again. I'll find you if I need you. And Olivia." Olivia turned. "Be careful." The first article dropped 4 days later. It was the front-page story of the Chronicle above the fold. The headline was a masterpiece of journalistic aggression: Sterling's Shadow Empire, a trail of bribes, shell companies, and betrayed trust. The article didn't mention Olivia. It didn't mention Chloe Vanderbilt or the trip to St. Bart's. It was a cold, surgical dissection of Richard's business practices. Thea laid out the evidence with meticulous precision, detailing the creation of the Shell Corporation, the suspicious timing of the political donations to Councilman Jennings, and the subsequent favorable zoning decisions that had netted Sterling's company hundreds of millions of dollars. She didn't publish the documents themselves that would be her next move, but she described their contents in such detail that it was clear her source was impeccable. Olivia was in the kitchen making tea when Richard came storming in, his face purple with rage. He was holding a copy of the paper, his knuckles white as he gripped it. "Did you see this trash?" he roared, slamming the paper down on the marble island. That vindictive witch. She's been trying to come after me for years. Someone is feeding her lies. Lies. He was looking at her, his eyes boring into her, searching for any flicker of guilt, any sign of triumph. She met his gaze with a carefully constructed mask of wide-eyed concern. "My God, Richard," she said, her voice trembling slightly. That's horrible. Who would do such a thing?" He stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching into an unbearable tension. She could see the gears turning in his mind, the paranoia warring with his ingrained belief in her meekness. He wanted to believe she was incapable of such a calculated betrayal. His ego demanded it. Finally, he seemed to make a decision. He let out a long, weary breath, the rage seeming to drain out of him, replaced by a practiced performance of a man under siege. "I don't know," he said, slumping into a chair. "But I'm going to find out. And when I do, I am going to destroy them." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "I need you by my side for this, Liv. We have to present a united front, you and me against the world, just like we always planned." He reached for her hand. His touch was like ice. "Of course, darling," she said, forcing a smile as she allowed him to pull her closer. "Whatever you need." As she stood there, his arm around her, the smell of his fury and fear filling the air, she felt a cold, terrifying certainty. This was just the beginning. The story was out. The storm had broken. And they were standing directly in its path. Thea Gallo's article was not a bomb. It was a contagion. It spread through the city's financial and political ecosystems with terrifying speed, infecting every aspect of Richard's life. The first 48 hours were a whirlwind of frantic phone calls, cancelled meetings, and the palpable chill of his powerful friends suddenly becoming unavailable. The sterling brand, once synonymous with luxury and success, was now tainted by the whiff of corruption. Richard, true to form, came out swinging. He convened a press conference in the lobby of Sterling Tower, a marble and glass cathedral to his own ego. Standing before a wall of cameras, with Olivia positioned slightly behind him, as the supportive stoic wife, he was a masterclass in controlled indignation. "These are baseless smears." He thundered, his voice resonating with rehearsed outrage. "The work of a journalist with a personal vendetta and a cowardly anonymous source who is feeding her lies. My business dealings are an open book. My success was earned through hard work and innovation, not by cutting corners or breaking laws. We will be pursuing every available legal option against the New York Chronicle for this malicious and defamatory attack." Olivia played her part, her expression a perfect blend of concern for her husband and dignified defiance. Inside, she was a roiling sea of anxiety and a grim, burgeoning satisfaction. She watched him lie to the world, to the battery of reporters, and felt not a shred of her former love, only a profound and chilling alienation. The man she had married had never really existed. He was a performance, and this was his grandest, most desperate one yet. But the performance wasn't working. Thea Gallo was too respected, her reporting too meticulous. The story had legs. The district attorney's office issued a terse no comment when asked if they were looking into the allegations, a phrase that in political parlance meant, yes, absolutely. Investors in his new development project began to get nervous. A Japanese consortium, which had been poised to inject $500 million into the deal, announced they were postponing their decision, pending further review. The stock price of Sterling Enterprises, his publicly traded parent company, dipped 5%, then 10%. The pressure began to fray Richard at the edges. The mask of the confident tycoon would slip, revealing the snarling, paranoid man beneath. The penthouse, once a quiet sanctuary, became a pressure cooker. He would pace for hours, phone fused to his ear, alternating between barking orders at his legal team and trying to soothe the nerves of his dwindling allies. His suspicion of Olivia was a constant, unspoken hum beneath the surface of their interactions. He had his security team sweep the apartment for bugs, a move he explained as standard procedure given the circumstances. He bought her a new phone, a present, he said, but she knew it was a tracking device, a way to monitor her every communication. She used it only for mundane conversations, continuing to communicate with Maya through a cheap burner phone she kept hidden in a box of tampons, the one place she knew he would never look. Then came the Chloe problem. The influencer, who had built a career on being aspirational and carefree, was not equipped for this kind of crisis. The comments on her Instagram feed had turned vicious. She was no longer just a home wrecker. She was now associated with a brewing criminal scandal. Her sponsors began to pull out. A lucrative contract with a high-end tequila brand was suddenly under review. Chloe panicked. She started calling Richard constantly, her voice a shrill, hysterical whine that Olivia could hear even from the next room. "You have to fix this, Richie," she'd shrieked during one call Olivia overheard. "My reputation is ruined. That journalist is going to start digging into me next. I just know it. Our contract says you're supposed to handle this stuff." Their business arrangement was crumbling under the pressure. Chloe, the carefully curated asset, had become a massive liability. After one particularly nasty, hour-long phone call, Richard smashed a Lalique vase against the wall, the sound of shattering crystal echoing the state of his life. He turned to Olivia, his eyes wild. "Do you see what they're doing to us?" "To our family," he demanded, as if she were a co-conspirator in his own defense. It was in that moment that Olivia decided to twist the knife. "Maybe you should just pay her more," she said, her voice deceptively gentle. She was arranging a bouquet of fresh lilies, her movements calm and deliberate. Richard froze. "What did you say?" Chloe Olivia said, not looking at him. "It's clearly a business arrangement. You have a contract after all. Maybe you just need to renegotiate her consulting fee to include hazard pay." The blood drained from his face. It was a direct hit. The one piece of information he couldn't fathom how she would know. He had been so careful with that folder, so certain of his digital security. The look in his eyes was no longer mere suspicion. It was a cold, terrifying certainty. "How do you know about that?" he whispered, his voice shaking with a rage that was far more potent than his earlier theatrics. Olivia finally looked up, meeting his gaze with a cool, level stare. "You're a terrible liar, Richard. And you're sloppy. You leave things open on your computer." The charade was over. The unspoken war was now declared. "You," he seethed, taking a step towards her. "This was you. You went to Gallo." "Prove it," she said, her voice steady, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. He stalked towards her, his face a mask of fury, his hands clenched into fists. For a terrifying second, she thought he was going to hit her. She stood her ground, her chin held high, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. His eyes followed the movement, and he stopped, his chest heaving. The baby, her silent, unknowing protector. "I am going to ruin you," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous promise. "When this is over, you will have nothing. No money, no friends. People will see you for the vindictive gold-digging snake you are. I will make sure of it. You can't ruin me, Richard, she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Because I was never one of your assets, and you are about to learn what happens when you write off a liability that knows all your secrets. He stared at her, breathing heavily, the hatred in his eyes a palpable force. The battle lines were drawn. It was no longer about money or infidelity. It was a primal struggle for survival. He would use all his power, all his wealth and influence to crush her. But she had the one thing he didn't: the truth. And she had given it to a woman who was about to publish her second installment. The fallout was just beginning. The week after their confrontation was a new kind of hell. The penthouse was no longer a home, but a battlefield thick with the silence of unspoken threats. Richard had his lawyers draft a public statement for Olivia to sign a declaration of her unwavering belief in his innocence. She refused. Her defiance sent him into a silent, simmering rage that was more unnerving than any of his shouted tirades. He had her followed. A sleek black town car would be parked across the street whenever she left the building. He was trying to intimidate her, to isolate her, to box her in. Meanwhile, Thea Gallo's second article hit the newsstands. This one was even more devastating than the first. The headline was stark: "The Sterling Ledgers. A how-to guide for bribing public officials." Thea, using the information from the thumb drive, published redacted snippets of the financial records from the Project Nightingale folder. She detailed the exact dates and amounts of the wire transfers from Sterling Enterprises to the Shell Company, and from the Shell Company to Councilman Jennings' campaign fund. It was a smoking gun, a clear and undeniable map of corruption. The story ignited a political firestorm. Councilman Jennings held a disastrous press conference where he sweated profusely and denied everything, looking guiltier with every word. The mayor, a longtime ally of Richard's, was forced to call for an independent investigation. The sharks were circling. Olivia watched it all unfold from her gilded prison, a strange mix of terror and triumph churning in her gut. She had set this in motion, but the story now had a life of its own, a powerful momentum she couldn't control. The breakthrough came from a place she hadn't expected. In a quiet suburb in New Jersey, a man named Frank Miller read Thea Gallo's latest article, his morning coffee growing cold in his hands. Frank was Sterling Enterprises' former chief financial officer. He was a quiet, meticulous accountant who had worked for Richard for 15 years. A year ago, Frank had discovered the Project Nightingale discrepancies. He had gone to Richard naively believing his boss would be horrified that it must be some kind of mistake. Richard had fired him on the spot. He'd had him sign an ironclad NDA in exchange for a meager severance package and threatened to ruin his reputation in the industry if he ever spoke a word. Frank, a man with a mortgage and 2 kids in college, had been terrified into silence. But seeing Thea's article, seeing the very secrets he had been forced to keep, laid bare for the world to see, sparked a flicker of courage in his long-dormant conscience. He knew he had something even more valuable than the ledgers Thea had published. He had the recordings. Richard, in his arrogance, had a habit of recording his meetings. He called it keeping an accurate record. Frank knew it was for blackmail purposes. For his own protection, Frank had made a copy of one specific recording before he was fired, the meeting where Richard and Councilman Jennings explicitly discussed the quid pro quo arrangement. The zoning variance in exchange for a series of offshore payments. It was the one piece of evidence that could send them both to prison. After a week of agonizing of sleepless nights and hushed, fearful conversations with his wife, Frank Miller made a decision. He found Thea Gallo's contact information and sent her a one-line email. "I have the rest of your story." Thea, sensing the magnitude of the moment, arranged to meet him immediately. The recording was everything she had hoped for, and more. The audio quality was crystal clear. Richard's voice, smug and self-assured, laying out the terms of the bribe. Jennings's greedy, eager acceptance. It was the nail in the coffin. Richard, however, was not a man to go down without a fight. He was bleeding money, his allies were abandoning him in droves, and the DA was impaneling a grand jury. He was desperate, and his desperation made him reckless. Through his own network of private investigators, he found out that Thea had been in contact with a disgraced former CFO. He put two and two together, and realized Frank Miller was about to betray him. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He drove out to Frank's suburban home himself. No lawyers, no security. He thought he could intimidate his former employee back into silence the way he always had. He offered Frank money, a lot of it, to disappear, to deny everything. When Frank refused his newfound courage holding firm, Richard's temper snapped. The argument spilled out onto the front lawn. "You are nothing!" Richard screamed, his face contorted with rage, completely oblivious to the neighbor across the street who was filming the entire exchange on her phone. "I made you, and I will destroy you. I will ruin your family." The threat, crude and desperate, was a critical error. The neighbor, who had already been following the Sterling scandal in the news, immediately sent the video to the local TV station. By that evening, the footage was everywhere. Richard Sterling, the sophisticated billionaire, was exposed as a common thug, threatening a scared, middle-aged man on his own front lawn. It shattered the last remnants of his public image. It was ugly, it was raw, and it was undeniable. Back in the penthouse, Olivia watched the news report, her hand covering her mouth in shock. This was beyond anything she could have orchestrated. Richard's own hubris, his own uncontrollable rage, was proving to be his most effective enemy. The phone rang. It was Maya. "It's over, Liv," she said, her voice awestruck. He just handed the prosecution a witness tampering charge on a silver platter. "He's done." Later that night, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Richard. It was two detectives from the NYPD. They were polite, professional, and deeply uncomfortable. "Mrs. Sterling," one of them began, "we have a warrant for your husband's arrest. We have reason to believe he may be here." Olivia stood in the doorway of the life that was now collapsing around her. She had a choice. She could have told them he wasn't there, bought him a few more hours of freedom. But she thought of the ultrasound, of the cold clinical room, of the lie about Dubai, of the casual cruelty in his eyes when he realized she knew. She looked past the detectives down the long marble hallway towards the master bedroom, where she knew he was hiding, making frantic phone calls to lawyers who were no longer answering. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "He's here. Please come in." The arrest was a quiet, humiliating affair. There was no dramatic chase, just the surreal sight of Richard Sterling, his face slack with shock, being led out of his own penthouse in handcuffs. The click of the cuffs was the punctuation mark at the end of their marriage. In the days that followed, Richard's empire imploded. The recording from Frank Miller and the witness tampering video created an open and shut case. His allies vanished, and his company fell apart. Thea Gallo's final article was less an exposé and more a eulogy for a fallen titan, noting that Richard's greatest liability was his inability to see the value in the people he considered his assets. Guided by Maya Olivia, filed for divorce. The infidelity clause, bolstered by the St. Bart's photo and Chloe Vanderbilt's tell-all interview, made the proceedings swift. Richard, facing decades in prison, signed the papers from a holding cell. Olivia took what the prenup stipulated, a fortune she didn't want for herself. She sold the penthouse, erasing every trace of him to scrub clean the gilded cage. 6 months later, Olivia was living in a sun-drenched Brooklyn brownstone. The proceeds from the sale were in a trust for her daughter Lily, and funded a new foundation she started to provide legal aid to women in abusive relationships. She returned to work at the library, not for the money, but for the peace it brought her. One afternoon, while rocking her 1-month-old daughter, a news alert popped up on her phone. It was the headline she had been waiting for. Sterling sentenced to 20 years. Judge cites staggering arrogance. She read that his downfall was traced back to a single ill-advised beach selfie. Looking at Lily sleeping in her arms, Olivia whispered, "He thought he was the star of the show, but he was just the villain in our story. And we get to write the happy ending." The story of Richard Sterling was over. Hers was just beginning. She was no longer a wife or a victim, but a mother, a philanthropist, and a survivor who had turned his ugliest secrets into a force for good. He wanted a headline, and she had given him exactly what he deserved. And there you have it, a story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate triumph. Olivia's journey shows us that sometimes the greatest strength is found in our most painful moments. It's a reminder that no one is untouchable, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of coming to light. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of truth and the strength of the human spirit, then please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button if you were cheering for Olivia. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Your support allows us to keep telling these important stories. Thank you for listening. The silence in the sprawling penthouse was the first thing that struck him. Not the peaceful quiet of early morning, but a cold, hollow emptiness that clung to the air. Nathaniel Sterling called her name, Ava, but only the echo answered. On the perfectly made bed, where his pregnant wife should have been sleeping, lay a single white envelope. Her name wasn't on it. His was. Inside the letter didn't scream or accuse. It was worse. It was calm, precise, and utterly devastating. It spoke of a truth he could no longer hide, and a future he had just lost. Ava was gone, and he was about to learn that her disappearance was not an act of weakness, but the first move in a war he never saw coming. The Sterling penthouse was a testament to a life lived above the clouds, both literally and figuratively. Perched 50 stories above the glittering expanse of downtown Chicago, its floor-to-ceiling windows framed a city that seemed to worship at its feet. For Ava Sterling, it was a beautiful cage, exquisitely decorated with modern art, Italian furniture, and the suffocating weight of loneliness. At 7 months pregnant, Ava moved through the opulent space with a gentle grace that belied the subtle anxiety in her eyes. She would often stand by the vast windows, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, and watch the tiny anonymous people bustling below. They all seemed to be heading somewhere with purpose. She, on the other hand, was simply waiting for her husband, Nathaniel, to come home, waiting for their baby, a little girl she had already named Lily to arrive, waiting for the life she had been promised to finally feel real. Nathaniel Sterling was a man forged in the crucible of ambition and old money. He was devastatingly handsome, with a charm that could disarm board members and a ruthlessness that had doubled his family's fortune. When he married Ava, a warm-hearted art curator with a kind smile and a genuine soul, the society pages called it a fairy tale. He was the prince, and she was the beautiful gentlewoman who had captured his heart. But fairy tales, Ava was learning, were often best read from a distance. The man she had fallen in love with, the one who quoted poetry during their first date at the Art Institute, the one who held her hand through a thunderstorm because he knew she was afraid was becoming a ghost. He was present in body, but absent in spirit, his mind perpetually elsewhere. His phone was a permanent extension of his hand, buzzing with texts he would angle away from her and calls he would take in his study, with the door firmly closed. "It's the merger, darling," he would say, his voice a smooth balm, meant to soothe any suspicion. "It's a monster. Just a few more weeks of this, I promise. Then it's just you, me, and our little Lily." Ava wanted to believe him. She clung to those words, repeating them to herself like a mantra. She filled her days with prenatal yoga, designing the nursery in soft shades of lavender and cream, and reading parenting books until the words blurred. She was building a nest, feathering it with all the love and hope she possessed, praying it would be enough to entice the man she married to finally land. Her best friend, Jessica Thorne, a sharp-witted attorney who saw the world in facts and evidence, was less convinced. A merger doesn't require whispering into a phone at 2 a.m. "Ava," Jessica had said over lunch the week before, her gaze pointed. "And it certainly doesn't require buying new cologne that smells suspiciously like something a 20-something would wear." "He's under a lot of stress," Ava defended, though her voice lacked conviction. "He's doing this for us, for our family." Jessica had simply sighed, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Just be careful. A man who builds an empire is used to acquisitions. Make sure you're not one of them." The words had stung because they echoed a tiny, terrified voice in her own heart. She pushed the doubt away, blaming it on hormones, on the anxieties of a first-time mother. Nathaniel still had his moments of tenderness. He would return late, exhausted from his meetings, and place a hand on her belly, a flicker of wonder in his eyes as he felt their daughter kick. "My two girls," he'd murmur, his voice thick with what she desperately hoped was genuine emotion. In those moments, the cage felt like a sanctuary again. Tonight was their 3rd anniversary. Nathaniel had called that afternoon, his voice slick with apology. "Ava, my love, I am so sorry. The final negotiations just went into overdrive. I can't get away. I feel terrible." Disappointment, sharp and familiar, pierced her heart. "Oh, I was making your favorite, the ossobuco. Save it for me, darling. I'll be home as soon as I can break free. I'll make it up to you, I swear. We'll have a proper celebration this weekend, just the two of us." He sounded so sincere, so regretful. "Okay, Nate," she whispered. "Be safe." After hanging up, she stood in the silent kitchen, the rich aroma of the slowly braising veal filling the air. It was a meal meant for two, a celebration of their love. Now it was just a sad reminder of another broken promise. But as she leaned against the cool marble countertop, a spark of defiance ignited within her. She was tired of waiting. She was tired of being the passive, understanding wife. She remembered him mentioning the name of the restaurant where the negotiations were being held, Vivere, a sleek, exclusive Italian place downtown. A plan bold and uncharacteristic formed in her mind. She would pack up a slice of the anniversary dinner she'd made. She'd go to him. She wouldn't interrupt. Of course, just give the package to the maitre d' to pass along. It would be a small, romantic gesture. A way to feel connected to his world, to show him she was thinking of him, to remind him of the home he had waiting for him. With a renewed sense of purpose, she changed into a simple but elegant maternity dress, her hands trembling slightly as she applied a touch of makeup. She felt a powerful kick from within, as if Lily were cheering her on. "It's okay, little one," she whispered to her belly. "Mummy's just going to go see Daddy." She carefully packed a container with the tender osso buco and a side of saffron risotto, a handwritten note tucked inside. "Couldn't let our anniversary pass without you tasting this. I love you. A." As the elevator descended, carrying her down from their isolated world in the sky, she felt a flutter of nervous excitement. She was breaking out of her cage, even if just for an hour. She was taking control. The city lights blurred past the windows of the cab, each one a tiny star in a galaxy she was finally rejoining. She had no idea she was racing toward a collision that would shatter that galaxy into a million irreparable pieces. The entrance to Vivere was discreet, marked only by a polished brass plaque and a heavy mahogany door. It was the kind of place that thrived on exclusivity, where fortunes were discussed over plates of truffle pasta and secrets were whispered over glasses of vintage Barolo. As Ava stepped out of the cab, the cool night air did little to calm the frantic beating of her heart. She clutched the small insulated bag containing her peace offering, feeling a sudden wave of self-consciousness. Was this a foolish, desperate idea? She pushed the thought aside. This was a romantic gesture, not a pathetic one. She was a wife trying to connect with her overworked husband on their anniversary. There was no shame in that. The restaurant's interior was a symphony of dark wood, soft leather, and muted golden light. A wave of warmth and the low hum of conversation washed over her. The maitre d', a tall, impeccably dressed man with a practiced air of polite indifference, approached her. "Good evening, madame. Do you have a reservation?" "Oh no, I'm not staying," Ava said quickly, offering him a warm smile. "I'm here to drop something off for my husband, Nathaniel Sterling. He's in a business meeting here." The maitre d's expression flickered for a fraction of a second, a subtle shift from professional courtesy to something guarded. "Mr. Sterling, you say?" "Yes, he's with the merger group." Ava's voice faltered slightly. She didn't even know the name of the company he was supposedly merging with. The realization sent a chill down her spine. "Of course. One moment." He glanced at a screen on his podium, his brow furrowing slightly. "Mr. Sterling is seated in one of our more private booths, toward the back. Could you possibly just give this to him for me?" she asked, holding up the bag. "It's a surprise for our anniversary." The man's eyes softened with what looked like genuine pity. It was a look that set every nerve in Ava's body on high alert. Perhaps it would be better if you gave it to him yourself, madam. This way." He gestured down a short, carpeted hallway, away from the main dining room. A sense of dread, cold and heavy, began to pool in Ava's stomach. Why wouldn't he just take the bag? Why was he looking at her, like she was a lamb being led to slaughter? Her feet felt like lead as she followed him. He stopped short of a secluded alcove where a single booth was tucked away, offering its occupants an intimate view of the city skyline. He nodded toward the booth, and then with a quiet "Excuse me," he retreated, leaving her standing alone in the hallway. From her vantage point, she could only see the back of Nathaniel's head. He was leaning forward, his posture animated and engaged in a way she hadn't seen in months. Across from him, a woman's hand adorned with a delicate diamond bracelet rested on the table. A cascade of platinum blonde hair caught the light. Ava's breath hitched. She took one hesitant step forward, peering around the partition. And then she saw her. The woman was Bianca Dubois, a supermodel whose face graced the covers of magazines that lay unread on their coffee table. She was impossibly beautiful, her features sharp and angelic. Her body poured into a shimmering silver dress that left little to the imagination. But it wasn't her beauty that made Ava's world tilt on its axis. It was the way she was looking at Nathaniel, a look of sultry, possessive intimacy. And it was the way Nathaniel was looking back at her. He was smiling. Not the tired, distracted smile he gave Ava, but a full, unguarded smile of pure delight. He reached across the table, his hand covering Bianca's. Their fingers intertwined. He leaned in and whispered something that made Bianca laugh, a tinkling sound that grated on Ava's ears like shattering glass. This wasn't a business meeting. This was a date. The air rushed from Ava's lungs. The small bag in her hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The anniversary dinner, the symbol of her love and effort, was now a pathetic joke. Every late night, every whispered phone call, every monster merger fell into place, forming a hideous mosaic of deceit. Jessica's warnings, her own suppressed doubts, they all came roaring to the surface. A wave of nausea and dizzying pain washed over her. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. The movement caught Nathaniel's eye. His head whipped around. His smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated shock, which quickly morphed into cold fury. His eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at her with adoration, now blazed with the anger of a man who had been caught. He disentangled his hand from Bianca's and stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Bianca looked over her perfectly sculpted face, registering a flicker of annoyance, before settling into a smirk of triumphant contempt as she took in the sight of Ava, pregnant, heartbroken, and utterly out of place. "Ava!" Nathaniel hissed, striding toward her. He grabbed her arm, his grip painfully tight, and pulled her further down the hallway, away from the prying eyes of the other diners. "What in God's name are you doing here?" His voice was a low, venomous whisper. There was no concern, no remorse, only rage at being discovered. "It's our anniversary," she choked out the words, tasting like ash. The bag slipped from her fingers, hitting the plush carpet with a dull thud. "Our anniversary. You think it's appropriate to follow me, to spy on me?" He seethed, his face inches from hers. "You've embarrassed me. You've embarrassed yourself." Tears streamed down Ava's face, hot and blurring her vision. "You're here with her, on our anniversary." "This is a business dinner." He lied, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "Bianca is the new face of Sterling Industries' lifestyle brand. This is work." Ava stared at him, at the man she had promised to love for eternity. She saw not a husband, but a stranger. A cruel, calculating stranger who was insulting her intelligence while her heart was breaking. From the alcove, Bianca's voice drifted toward them, laced with bored amusement. "Nate, darling, is there a problem? Your guest looks unwell." The dismissive way she said guest was the final brutal blow. Ava was not his wife, not the mother of his child. She was an inconvenience, an interruption. Ava looked from Nathaniel's furious face to the smirking model, and then back. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a chilling clarity. The cage wasn't just lonely. It was a lie. The man she loved didn't exist. He was a character Nathaniel had played to acquire her, and now the performance was over. Without another word, she wrenched her arm from his grasp. She turned her back on him, on the life they had built, and walked away. She didn't run. She walked with a strange, newfound calm, her posture erect. Each step was a deliberate severing of a tie. She could feel his eyes burning into her back, but he didn't call out to her. He didn't follow. She walked past the pitying maitre d', through the heavy mahogany door, and out into the indifferent city night. The cold air hit her face, but she barely felt it. She was already numb. The fairy tale was over. The shattered pieces of her reality lay scattered on a restaurant floor, and all she could do was walk away from the wreckage. The taxi ride back to the penthouse was a silent, surreal blur. The city lights, once symbols of life and energy, now seemed to mock her, flashing past the window like a series of cruel, glittering sneers. Ava sat perfectly still in the back seat, one hand resting on her belly, not out of tenderness, but as if to shield her unborn daughter from the toxic truth that had just poisoned their world. The baby was the only real thing left. She paid the driver in a daze and rode the private elevator up 50 floors, the ascent feeling like a descent into hell. When the doors opened directly into their apartment, the opulence that had once felt comforting now seemed grotesque. It was a stage set for a play about a happy marriage, and she had just discovered the lead actor was a fraud. The scent of the osso buco she had lovingly prepared still hung in the air, a cloying reminder of her naivety. She walked into the kitchen, her movements stiff and robotic, and dumped the entire pot of food into the garbage disposal. She watched, transfixed, as the rich, dark meat and vegetables were pulverized into an unrecognizable slurry. It felt symbolic. For hours she wandered the vast apartment like a ghost. She touched the cold marble of the countertops, the soft cashmere of the throws, the rigid spines of the books on the shelves. These were the props of her life, and they felt utterly alien to her. She drifted into the nursery, a sanctuary of lavender and cream that was now tainted. The tiny dresses hanging in the closet, the small rocking horse in the corner, the mural of gentle stars on the ceiling. They were all for a child who would now be born into a broken home. A sob, raw and ragged, finally escaped her lips, breaking the suffocating silence. She sank to the floor, leaning against the crib, and wept. She cried for the man she thought she had married, for the love she thought they shared, for the future that had been stolen from her. She cried until she was empty, until there were no tears left, only a cooled, hard clarity settling deep in her bones. Nathaniel's betrayal wasn't just an affair. It was a fundamental disrespect for her, for their marriage, for their child. His rage at being caught was more telling than any apology could have been. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was furious that she had seen him for who he truly was. She couldn't raise a child in this environment of lies and contempt. She couldn't let her daughter grow up thinking that this was what love looked like. A new emotion began to bloom in the desolate landscape of her heart. Not anger, but resolve. A steely, unshakable resolve. She would not be a victim. She would not be the poor, pregnant wife whispered about in society columns. She would not stay and fight a man who had no honor. She would disappear. The plan formed with a startling swiftness and precision she didn't know she possessed. It was as if the shock had burned away all her indecision, leaving only a core of pure protective instinct. She went to her private study, a small room Nathaniel had always dismissed as her hobby space. She opened a locked drawer in her desk, revealing a bank book for an account he didn't know existed. It was an inheritance from her grandmother, a fiercely independent woman who had once told her, "Always have your own garden, my dear, a place no one else can touch." Ava had kept the account, depositing small amounts from her freelance art consulting work over the years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. It was her garden. She packed one small, nondescript suitcase, not with designer clothes from her current life, but with practical things, comfortable shoes, simple dresses, the worn copy of Pride and Prejudice her mother had given her. She took only one framed photo, a sonogram picture of Lily. She packed her prenatal vitamins and a small folder containing her essential documents. Everything else, the couture gowns, the glittering jewelry, the empty trappings of being Mrs. Sterling, she left behind. They were parts of a costume she would never wear again. Finally, she sat at the grand mahogany desk in Nathaniel's study. She took out a single sheet of his heavy, monogrammed stationery. Her hand did not shake as she wrote. She poured none of her heartbreak onto the page. There would be no accusations, no pleas, no long, tear-stained explanations. He didn't deserve her pain. She wrote only 3 short sentences. Nathaniel, you once told me you could never live in a world without trust. I see now that you were only ever talking about your own. I am going to find a world where my daughter can breathe truth. She didn't sign it with love. She didn't sign it at all. She walked into their master bedroom. The king-sized bed, with its 1,000 thread-count sheets, looked vast and empty. She placed the folded letter squarely in the center of his pillow. It was a stark, white surrender flag in a war he hadn't even known she was fighting. With a final look around the penthouse that was no longer her home, Ava Sterling walked to the service elevator, her small suitcase in hand. She rode it down to the ground floor, emerging not into the grand doorman-attended lobby, but into a quiet back alley. She slipped into the pre-dawn darkness of the city, melting into the shadows, like a phantom leaving behind a life that had been nothing more than a beautiful gilded lie. Hours later, Nathaniel returned. He was still fuming, replaying the disastrous scene at the restaurant. Bianca had been furious, accusing him of being sloppy. He'd spent the last few hours placating her with promises of a trip to Paris and a new diamond necklace. He entered the penthouse, expecting a confrontation, ready to unleash a torrent of blame and gaslighting on Ava for her hysterical behavior. But the apartment was silent. "Ava," he called out, a thread of irritation in his voice. "We need to talk." Silence. He strode into their bedroom, his speech already prepared. But he stopped dead in the doorway. The bed was empty, perfectly made. And on his pillow, that solitary white envelope waited. He picked it up, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He read the 3 sentences. He read them again. The words were calm, devoid of the emotion he had expected. It was their very coldness that chilled him to the bone. This wasn't the writing of a distraught wife who would be crying at her mother's house. This was something else, something final. He checked the closets. Her clothes were all there. Her jewelry box was untouched, but her passport was gone from the safe, and the small suitcase she'd had since before they were married was missing. A frantic search of the apartment revealed nothing else out of place. It was as if she had simply evaporated. He stood in the middle of the living room as the sun began to rise, bathing the penthouse in a pale, ethereal light. The letter was still clutched in his hand. Annoyance was slowly giving way to a strange, unfamiliar feeling. It wasn't guilt. Not yet. It was dread. The chilling realization that he had underestimated the quiet, gentle woman he called his wife. He had broken her heart, and in response she had simply vanished. For the first 48 hours, Nathaniel's primary emotion was a simmering, arrogant rage. Ava's disappearance was in his mind, a childish, theatrical stunt designed to punish him. He imagined her holed up at Jessica's apartment, weeping and expecting him to come crawling with apologies and a ridiculously expensive piece of jewelry. He resolved to let her stew, let her realize how foolish she was being. He needed to control the narrative, and the first step was to project an aura of calm indifference. He went to the office, chaired his meetings with his usual sharp authority, and even joked with his senior partners. When his secretary asked if Mrs. Sterling was feeling well, as she hadn't called to confirm their dinner reservations. Nathaniel waved a dismissive hand. She's decided to visit her sister in Oregon for a few days. A last-minute trip before the baby comes. You know how she is. The lie came easily, but it felt thin even to him. Ava hadn't spoken to her sister in over a year after a petty argument. It was a clumsy patch on a rapidly fraying reality. At night, the penthouse's silence grew louder, more accusatory. He'd walk past the nursery, and the lavender and cream perfection of the room felt like a judgment. He'd see her favorite mug by the coffee machine and feel a strange pang of something. It wasn't loss, not yet. It was disruption. His well-ordered life had been disrupted. He called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail after a single ring. It was turned off. He sent a series of texts, each one escalating in tone. Ava, this little game is absurd. Come home. I know you're with Jessica. Tell her to stop feeding you this feminist nonsense. We are married and we will solve this. Fine. Have it your way. But you're being incredibly selfish. Think about the baby. No response. On the third day, a crack appeared in his composure. One of the city's most voracious gossip columnists, a woman named Diana Vane, called his office. Nathaniel, darling, she cooed, her voice dripping with faux concern. I heard a rather distressing rumor that Ava was seen leaving Vivre in tears the other night, and no one has seen her since. Is everything all right in paradise? Nathaniel's blood ran cold. Diana, you know how rumors are. Ava is perfectly fine. She's on a short trip. Oh, how lovely. And I suppose the other rumor that you were dining with the exquisite Bianca Dubois at the time is also just a silly misunderstanding. He ended the call, his hand trembling slightly. The story broke the next morning, a small but venomous piece tucked into the society pages. Trouble for the Sterlings. Millionaire magnate Nathaniel Sterling was spotted getting cozy with model Bianca Dubois on his anniversary, while his 7 months pregnant wife, Ava, has reportedly gone on a trip. Sources say Mrs. Sterling has been incommunicado for days. Has the fairy tale soured? The article was like a lit match tossed into a room full of gasoline. The calls started immediately. His mother, a formidable matriarch concerned only with the family's public image, was apoplectic. Nathaniel, what is the meaning of this missing pregnant wife, a model? Have you lost your mind? Find your wife and fix this before it tarnishes the Sterling name. His business partners were more subdued but equally concerned. The merger was in its final delicate stages, the optics of the CEO being embroiled in a sordid domestic scandal were catastrophic. This needs to go away, Nate, his senior partner warned, his voice grim. Clean it up. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through Nathaniel's arrogance. This was no longer a marital spat. It was a crisis. He drove to Jessica Thorne's law firm, storming past her receptionist and barging into her office. Jessica was sitting behind her desk, looking coolly composed. She didn't seem surprised to see him. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice raw. "I assume you're referring to your wife?" Jessica replied, her tone glacial. "She didn't invite him to sit. The one you publicly humiliated. This is between me and Ava. You have no right to hide her from me." Jessica leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Let me be very clear, Nathaniel. I haven't seen or spoken to Ava since before your anniversary. But if I did know where she was, I wouldn't tell you. A man who can't be trusted with his wife's heart certainly can't be trusted with her location. Now get out of my office before I have you removed for trespassing." Her denial was so absolute, so convincing, that it genuinely terrified him. If Ava wasn't with Jessica, then where on earth was she? The situation spiraled. The media frenzy grew. News vans were now parked outside his office building and their penthouse. The story had evolved the vanishing of Ava Sterling. His face alongside a glowing photo of a pregnant Ava and a sultry shot of Bianca was plastered everywhere. Bianca, far from being a comfort, became a nightmare. She called him incessantly, her voice a shrill mix of panic and accusation. "My agent just dropped me. They said the scandalous homewrecker image isn't good for my brand. You told me she was nobody, Nate. You told me you had it under control. I'm handling it," he snapped back, his patience worn to a thread. "Handling it. The whole world thinks I'm a monster who drove a poor pregnant woman to run away. You need to fix this. Hold a press conference. Tell them we're in love and she was unstable." Her self-absorbed narcissism was suddenly repellent. The glamour and excitement she represented had curdled into something cheap and desperate. He saw her for what she was, another acquisition, and one that was rapidly losing its value. A week after Ava left, Nathaniel sat alone in the dark penthouse, the city lights twinkling indifferently outside. His empire was shaking, his reputation was in tatters, and his mistress was a liability. The silence of the apartment was no longer just empty, it was mocking him. He finally looked at the letter again, the 3 short sentences that had started it all. "I am going to find a world where my daughter can breathe truth." He had dismissed it as melodrama. Now it sounded like a declaration of war. He had not just lost a wife, he had created an enemy. And for the first time in his gilded, privileged life, Nathaniel Sterling was truly deeply afraid. He was out of his depth. His usual tools of power, money, and intimidation were useless. He needed to find her not just to save his company, but because a terrifying void had opened up in his life where she used to be. He had to find her, and for that, he needed someone who could operate in the shadows he had so carelessly created. With his world crumbling, and the police now asking pointed questions about domestic disturbances, a line of inquiry that made his blood run cold, Nathaniel knew he needed an expert. He didn't need a bulldog lawyer or a slick PR agent. He needed a ghost. He needed someone who could navigate the unseen world of secrets and disappearances, someone who operated with discretion and ruthless efficiency. His search led him to a name spoken only in hushed tones in the city's most powerful circles, Mr. Peterson. He wasn't a private investigator in the traditional sense. He was a problem solver, a former intelligence agent who now offered his considerable skills to the highest bidder. His office was a small, unassuming suite in a historic but unremarkable building, a deliberate choice to project anonymity over opulence. Mr. Peterson was a man in his late 50s with greying hair, impeccably tailored but simple suits, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He listened to Nathaniel's frantic, self-serving version of events without interruption, his hands steepled on the uncluttered surface of his desk. When Nathaniel finished, Peterson was silent for a long moment. "You have lied to the police, the media, and your business partners." Peterson stated, his voice calm and even. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation. "You will now tell me the truth. Every detail. My work is impossible when built on a foundation of deceit." Stripped of his usual power, Nathaniel found himself confessing everything: the affair with Bianca, the confrontation at the restaurant, his cruel words, the coldness of Ava's letter. He painted a picture of Ava as gentle, unassuming, and emotionally fragile. "She couldn't have done this on her own," Nathaniel insisted. "She's not capable. Someone must be helping her, manipulating her." Peterson's expression remained unreadable. "Assumptions are the enemy of discovery, Mr. Sterling. You have assumed your wife is weak. Let us operate on the evidence instead." Peterson's investigation began not with a search for Ava, but with a forensic deconstruction of her life. He wasn't looking for a damsel in distress. He was looking for a strategist. He accessed financial records, phone logs, and email accounts that Nathaniel didn't even know Ava had. Slowly, a portrait of a completely different woman began to emerge. "Your wife was not idle, Mr. Sterling," Peterson reported, a week later, sliding a thin file across his desk. "For the past 6 months, she has been methodically moving small sums of money from your joint accounts amounts, small enough to go unnoticed by you, into a private trust. The total is just over $200,000. Nathaniel stared dumbfounded. "That's impossible. She never handled the finances." She also liquidated a small portfolio of stocks she inherited from her grandmother 3 weeks before she disappeared. Peterson continued, his voice impassive. "And she made a single significant withdrawal from that private account the morning she vanished. $50,000. In cash." The image of a weeping, hysterical woman was evaporating, replaced by that of a calculating planner. The disappearance was not a spontaneous act of heartbreak. It was a premeditated escape. Peterson's inquiries delved deeper, uncovering layers of Nathaniel's own life he preferred to keep hidden. The investigator found evidence of other indiscretions, a pattern of behavior with women that bordered on predatory. More alarmingly, he flagged several of Nathaniel's recent business dealings. "This merger you're so concerned about," Peterson said, his gaze sharp. "The one with Omnicorp. My sources tell me there are irregularities, whispers of shell corporations' inflated asset valuations, things the SEC would find very interesting." "Those are baseless rumors." Nathaniel snapped, a fresh wave of panic rising in his throat. "Perhaps," Peterson conceded, "but what is interesting is your wife's search history on her personal laptop, which you overlooked in your study. In the weeks leading up to her departure, she wasn't just searching for nursery furniture. She was searching for forensic accounting, whistleblower protection, and the names of several prominent white-collar crime attorneys, including notably Jessica Thorne, who specializes in that very field." The room seemed to shrink around Nathaniel. He felt a profound, sickening chill. Ava's departure wasn't just about the affair. That was merely the catalyst. She had been digging. She had found something far more dangerous to him than a jilted lover. The affair didn't just break her heart. It confirmed that the man she was married to was rotten to the core, and it gave her the final push she needed to act. She wouldn't, Nathaniel stammered the words hollow. She wouldn't understand any of that. "Again, Mr. Sterling, you underestimate her," Peterson said coolly. "Your wife has a master's degree in art history, with a focus on provenance. Her entire academic career was about tracing the history of objects, uncovering forgeries, and following a paper trail. You seem to have mistaken a quiet nature for a simple mind." The investigator's final discovery was the most direct. He had traced a single phone call Ava made on a disposable burner phone she had purchased the day she disappeared. The call lasted 15 minutes and pinged a cell tower in a remote rural part of Wisconsin, but the number she called was not for a friend or family member. It was the front desk of a small private airfield. She chartered a flight, Peterson concluded, closing the file. A single-engine plane paid for in cash. No flight plan was filed with the FAA, which is legal for this type of aircraft. The pilot is a discreet professional who specializes in off-the-grid transportation for wealthy clients seeking privacy. He dropped her off at a similar private airstrip outside of Aspen, Colorado. From there, the trail goes cold. Aspen, a playground for the rich, but also a gateway to vast, isolated mountain communities where a person could easily disappear if they had the resources and the will. Nathaniel slumped in his chair, utterly defeated. Every move he made had been anticipated. Every assumption he held had been wrong. He had been playing checkers, while Ava was playing a masterful game of chess. Her letter suddenly made terrifying sense. She wasn't just leaving him. She was running from him, protecting her child from a man she now saw as a criminal. And she had taken something with her knowledge that could not only end their marriage, but could also send him to prison. The search for his missing wife had become a desperate race to find a woman who held the power to destroy him completely. And she was, by all accounts, 2 steps ahead. The air in the small mountain town of Havenwood, Colorado, was thin, crisp, and clean. It smelled of pine and damp earth, a scent so fundamentally different from the exhaust-choked air of Chicago that it felt like it belonged to another planet. For the woman now known as Amelia Grace, it was the smell of freedom. Ava, or Amelia as she now called herself, had found Havenwood through a network Jessica had meticulously arranged. It was a town nestled deep in the Rockies, a place for people who didn't want to be found. Here she wasn't the vanished wife of a millionaire. She was a quiet, pregnant widow who had moved west to escape painful memories and start anew. The townspeople, rugged and self-reliant, respected privacy. They offered quiet smiles and nods, but asked no prying questions. Her new home was a small rustic cabin set on a few acres of land, with a stream gurgling nearby, and a breathtaking view of the snow-capped peaks. It was a world away from the sterile, glass-walled penthouse. Here the floors were made of warm, knotted wood, the furniture was comfortable and worn, and the silence was peaceful, not oppressive. The first few weeks were a blur of settling in and decompressing from the trauma of her escape. There were nights she woke up screaming the image of Nathaniel's furious face, and Bianca's mocking smirk burned into her memory. But with each sunrise that painted the mountains in hues of pink and gold, the ghosts of her past life began to fade. She had not done this alone. Jessica Thorne had been her silent partner, her lifeline. Weeks before the confrontation, when Ava's suspicions about Nathaniel's business dealings had solidified into terrifying certainty, she had reached out to her old friend. "I think he's a criminal, Jess." Ava had confessed, her voice trembling over a secure, encrypted line. "And I think I'm in danger. Not physically, but my whole life is built on a lie. If I confront him, he'll crush me." Jessica, ever the strategist, had immediately switched into action mode. Then we don't confront. We escape. We gather evidence, we create a new identity, and we build you a fortress. When the time is right, you won't be confronting him. You'll be dismantling him. Together they had planned every detail. Jessica had arranged the burner phones, the private charter, the purchase of the cabin through a blind trust, and the creation of Ava's new identity. Ava's role had been to play the part of the unsuspecting wife while quietly downloading damning files from Nathaniel's home server files, detailing offshore accounts, fraudulent invoices and communications that clearly outlined his intent to defraud his new business partners. She had copied them onto a small encrypted hard drive that was now stored in a safety deposit box in a bank in a neighboring town. Now, in the safety of Havenwood, Ava focused on the one thing that truly mattered: her baby. She spent her days walking along the mountain trails, breathing in the clean air and talking to the little life growing inside her. She read poetry aloud, her voice soft in the quiet of the woods. She rediscovered her love for art, not as a curator of other people's work, but as a creator. She bought a set of watercolors and began to paint the stunning landscapes around her, the vibrant colors a balm to her bruised soul. 2 months after her arrival, she went into labor. Her midwife, a calm, sturdy woman named Mary, was by her side. There was no cold, sterile hospital room, no panicked husband in the waiting room. The birth took place in her cabin, in front of a crackling fire, as a gentle snow began to fall outside. After hours of intense labor, she held her daughter in her arms. The baby was perfect, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the mountains. Ava wept, but this time her tears were not of sorrow, but of overwhelming, fierce, and unconditional love. She named her Hope, not Lily. Lily was the name chosen by a woman living in a cage. Hope was the name chosen by a woman who had broken free. "Hello, Hope," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she kissed her daughter's forehead. "It's you and me. We're going to be okay." Motherhood consumed her, healed her. Caring for Hope gave her a profound sense of purpose that her life with Nathaniel had always lacked. She was no longer just Ava Sterling, the wife. She was Amelia Grace Hope's mother. It was a title that felt more real and more valuable than any other. She kept in touch with Jessica weekly through encrypted emails. Jessica updated her on the firestorm she had left behind. Nathaniel's public image was in ruins. The Omnicorp merger had stalled the partners, now deeply spooked by the scandal and the whispers of financial impropriety. Peterson. Jessica learned through her own network was digging, getting closer. "He's hired the best," Jessica wrote. "They will find you eventually. Nathaniel is cornered and desperate. We need to decide when to make our move." One crisp autumn afternoon, as Ava sat on her porch, rocking a sleeping Hope, she looked out at the majestic, unyielding mountains. They had stood for millennia, silent witnesses to storms and seasons, their strength absolute. She felt a kinship with them. She was no longer the fragile woman who had fled in the night. She had weathered her own storm. She had given birth to a new life, and in doing so had reborn herself. She was strong. She was ready. She opened her laptop and sent a short, decisive email to Jessica. "It's time. Let's burn it all down." The Sterling Industries annual shareholder meeting was being held in the grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel, a historic bastion of old Chicago wealth. The atmosphere was thick with tension. For months, the company had been hemorrhaging value. The failed Omnicorp merger, coupled with the ongoing scandal of the CEO's missing wife and swirling rumors of an impending SEC investigation, had created a perfect storm of investor panic. Nathaniel Sterling stood at the podium, his face pale and drawn a phantom of the confident titan he had been less than a year ago. He was fighting for his corporate life. He delivered a desperate, impassioned speech filled with jargon about restructuring, future-proofing, and synergistic alignment. He was trying to project strength to reassure the grim-faced men and women in the audience that their investments were safe, that he was still in control. But his voice lacked its former authority. His charm felt rehearsed and hollow. The room was not buying it. And so, he concluded, his voice straining, I ask for your continued faith in my leadership as we navigate these temporary headwinds and steer this great company toward a prosperous future. A tense, unconvinced silence followed. The chairman of the board, a stern man named Arthur Vance, was about to open the floor to questions. Questions Nathaniel knew would be brutal when the grand double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Every head turned. A ripple of gasps and whispers spread through the room like wildfire. Framed in the doorway stood two women. The first was Jessica Thorne, her expression sharp and commanding. But it was the woman beside her who stunned the room into absolute silence. It was Ava. But it was not the Ava anyone remembered. The soft, gentle wife was gone. In her place stood a woman of breathtaking poise and power. She was dressed in a tailored, dark blue suit that was understated yet undeniably expensive. Her hair was styled in a sleek, professional cut. Her face, free of the haunted anxiety that had once clouded it, was calm and resolute. She radiated a confidence that was more potent than any of Nathaniel's blustering speeches. In her arms, she held a beautiful, bright-eyed baby girl. Nathaniel stared, his blood turning to ice in his veins. He felt as if he were seeing a ghost, a vengeful, impeccably dressed ghost. His mouth went dry. All the air seemed to have been sucked from the room. With a slow, deliberate pace, Ava and Jessica walked down the center aisle, the clicking of their heels the only sound in the cavernous ballroom. The shareholders parted before them as if they were royalty. Ava's eyes were locked on Nathaniel, her gaze level and unyielding. It was not a look of hatred or of pain. It was the cool, detached gaze of a victor observing her vanquished foe. They stopped directly in front of the podium. Ava adjusted the baby in her arms, her movements smooth and maternal. Arthur Vance, the chairman, was the first to find his voice, though it was strained with shock. Ava, Mrs. Sterling. My God, is that you? It is Arthur, Ava replied, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone Nathaniel had just been using. It carried to every corner of the room. Although I will be reclaiming my maiden name, Ashford, please call me Ms. Ashford. Nathaniel finally found his voice, a choked, desperate rasp. Ava, where have you been? I've been worried sick. I hired people. I've been searching everywhere for you. Ava gave a small, humorless smile. Yes, I know. Mr. Peterson is very good at his job. But I wasn't lost, Nathaniel. I was preparing. She turned her attention from her stunned husband to the board and the assembled shareholders. I apologize for this interruption, she said, her voice ringing with authority. But I am here today as the mother of Hope Ashford, who is through my marriage settlement and her paternal lineage a significant shareholder in this company, and I am here as a whistleblower. A collective gasp went through the room. The word whistleblower was like a death knell. Jessica Thorne stepped forward, opening a leather briefcase. My client, Ms. Ashford, has irrefutable evidence that Mr. Sterling has for the past 2 years been engaged in a systematic scheme to defraud this company and its shareholders. She began distributing slim, neatly bound dossiers to the shocked board members. In seat, you will find documentation of illegal wire transfers to unaudited offshore accounts, falsified invoices used to inflate company earnings prior to the Omnicorp merger attempt, and internal communications proving Mr. Sterling's intent to embezzle funds. The total amount is in excess of $50 million. Panic erupted. Shouts of disbelief and anger filled the ballroom. Nathaniel was ashen, staggering back from the podium, as if he'd been physically struck. "Lies," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. This is revenge. She's a scorned woman, trying to destroy me." Ava met his desperate gaze, her own expression unpitying. "Was I scorned, Nathaniel?" "Yes, but this isn't about revenge for a broken heart. It's about justice for your crimes. It's about protecting my daughter's legacy from the man who was willing to steal it." She shifted hope in her arms, and for the first time her voice softened as she looked down at her child. "You built an empire on lies," she said, her eyes lifting back to his, now hard as diamonds. "And I'm here to ensure that my daughter's future is built on truth." Her entrance was not just a return, it was a coup d'etat. She hadn't come back to reclaim her place beside him. She had come back to take his. The room was in chaos, but Ava stood at its center, a pillar of calm, righteous power. The vanishing act was over. The reckoning had just begun. The evidence in the dossiers was a bombshell that obliterated Nathaniel's world in minutes. The ballroom erupted as board members saw undeniable proof of his crimes. His desperate claims of a scorned wife's revenge were useless against the cold, hard facts of his own emails and offshore accounts. Nathaniel, his face a mask of disbelief, lunged toward Ava. "You've destroyed everything!" he screamed, his voice raw with fury. Before he could reach her, security guards intercepted him, restraining the disgraced CEO as he thrashed and cursed. Ava looked at the shell of the man she had married, her heart holding only a calm, final resolve. "You destroyed it, Nathaniel," she said, her voice cutting through his rage. "I just turned on the lights." With that, she turned her back on him and walked out of the ballroom, with her daughter and her lawyer, leaving the chaos behind. Her departure was followed by the swift arrival of federal agents. Nathaniel was arrested on the spot, his downfall as public and humiliating as he had always feared. The fallout was absolute. Convicted on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement, Nathaniel was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, stripped of his assets and his power. The Sterling board, in an effort to save the company, appointed Ava, now Ms. Ashford, to an advisory role, relying on her integrity to restore faith in the business. 1 year later, Ava stood in her bright, sunny apartment overlooking a park. Her paintings filled the walls with color, and her daughter Hope took her first happy steps across the wooden floor. She was not a wife who had vanished, but a woman who had found herself. She had escaped the gilded cage, and in doing so had built a true home, a life founded not on wealth, but on the unshakable ground of truth and love. What an incredible journey of strength and resilience. Ava's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can often ignite the fiercest transformations. She turned her pain not into despair, but into a meticulously planned quest for justice, proving that true power isn't about wealth or status, but about integrity, courage, and an unbreakable love for her child. She didn't just escape a toxic marriage. She dismantled an empire of lies to build a future based on truth. If her story of triumph moved you, please take a moment to show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it, and share this video with someone who loves a story of ultimate karma and empowerment. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next gripping tale. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.